Okay, so what this is about the fact that it's about, I'm a methodologist. I'm interested in I'm a researcher, so this is about studying control systems. So about the difference between studying open loop systems, causal systems, and control systems. So when we study the behavior of open loop systems, you can see that the way you go about studying them is you observe their overt, you look for mathematical regularities in their overt behavior. That's the way it was done. It's done in science. With closed loop systems, they can be they're understood by determining what I would say are the mathematical characteristics of covert behavior, perceptual variables that they control. So what we're going to talk about today are 4 examples of mathematical regularities that have been discovered in the overt behavior of people that have misled people into thinking that they say something about how human beings work. So the lesson of this hopefully very abbreviated talk is that when you're studying the behavior of a system, you have to know whether you're dealing with a control system, closed loop system, or an open loop system. And telling the difference between them requires the ability to look at behavior through control theory glasses, which means looking at behavior as a process of control. I think that's the problem we have. Anyway, here's an example of an approach to, or a classic example of coming to an understanding of open loop systems by looking at mathematical regularities in their behavior. Here's actually Kepler noticed this regularity of the relationship between the period that a planet takes to get around the sun and its basically the width of its the longest part of its elliptical orbit. That's what R is. And it's so it's a power relationship. The square of the period is proportional to the cube of the semi-major axis, and it's a very accurate, it's a perfect, perfect thing. Great observation. And it turns out it was the basis for Newton figuring out why it happened. And that's so we have this observation of a mathematical fact about the behavior of the planets, and Newton's laws can be used to derive why that would happen. And that's what that is. This is an example of a mathematical understanding of a closed loop system. It starts with observing mathematical regularities in its covert behavior, the behavior of controlled variables. And this is, so once you know the variables that the system is controlling, you can predict exactly how it will act to protect those variables from disturbances. And so the figure on the left shows the behavior of a person intercepting a toy helicopter, and this is the model that produces that behavior. The important part of this model is this part, the input functions. It's when you know that you've got one system trying to control the vertical optical velocity of the ball, and the other trying to control the lateral displacement of the model. Then, when you properly connect the output functions to it, and set up the parameters correctly, you get model behavior, which is that's the red line here is the model behavior, and it just matches the actual movements of the person going to catch the ball perfectly. This is intercept the helicopter. This green thing is the helicopter, and this is 2 different runs of the behavior. But so that's an example of understanding what people were doing. This is actual behavior, by the way. This is what people did. understanding behavior by understanding what perceptual variables they're controlling. Okay, so what I guess I'm talking about, oh good, can I have some water? Thank you. Okay, so mathematical misunderstanding of a control system involves approaching the study of control systems the same way you approach studying a open loop system, a causal system. You look at observed regularities in its behavior, and because of the nature of closed loop systems, you observe regularities in overt behavior. And one example, but these regularities that you see in the system, when it's a closed loop system, are actually side effects of controlling input variables. So one example of such a regularity that exists is what Bill called the stimulus response illusion. And I set up a little demo on the net, which I'm not going to go to because apparently it's protected. But anyway, if you get the slides, you can go and see how it works. But here's what it is. It's a little spider on there on the screen that is moving towards you or away from you, and you're supposed to keep it away from you. You're supposed to control the distance, or you're trying to control the distance of the spider from you by moving the mouse. And what you see, what you observe in the overt behavior of the person is this relationship between how much the spider is pushing towards or away from you and how much you push back with your handle. And so these two lines represent two different behaviors you get from the same person in the same run when all you do is change the gain of the feedback connection between the person's behavior and the variable they're controlling, the feedback function. So what this shows is that when you've got when this feedback function is quite weak, when it's a small number, you have to push harder, you have to make more of a push to keep the spider away from you. And so it looks like you're real sensitive to it. It looks like you're really afraid of spiders. So that's that blue light. Pardon?
I'm just laughing, Rick.
Oh, and when you...
You're genius.
Huh?
It's praise at your genius, that was the purpose.
This is simple stuff. This is, and when you make the feedback connection, so you're understanding it, right? You get it? So when K is big, just a little push will have a big effect on the spider, so it'll look like you are kind of easygoing about spiders. And so it looks like you're dealing with different systems, different things going on in the head, between stimulus response, just by changing the external characteristics of the environment. And so the illusion is that this change in the feedback function that looks like it's a change in you, and it's not. So. Okay, so what we're going to do in now, 10 minutes, is talk about 4 examples of real research that's been done where people have found regularities in behavior, mathematical regularities, which they thought to reflect characteristics of the person, just like in the, which actually don't show character. They're just completely side effects of. Now this was kind of now, just to show you that I'm fair, this is work done by people I've worked with who I like. and this is work on how, looking at how people catch baseballs. But this was the first work that appeared was in a science article, which was shown to me by Bruce Abbott on the net. So the net used to be valuable for learning things. what you're seeing here is a plot. They did this very clever thing. This was back in 1996 when video cameras were about that big. So they strapped a video camera on the side of a person catching a baseball, and they took pictures of what he was seeing as he or she was seeing as they caught a baseball. And then they take the image or the video, and they plot out where the ball was on the image relative to a reference point in that image. And what you see for different balls is the image of the ball, or the optical image of the ball, traces out these kind of straight lines. This is a mathematical regularity that is pretty compelling. And it's called so they called it a linear optical trajectory. And what they thought was that this is how you catch baseballs. That you catch baseballs by running so as to keep the ball moving in a straight line like that. And for various reasons, I thought, well, that doesn't seem like it could work. So I developed a model, which is essentially like the little model you saw earlier that catches balls. And this is the results of a model that is not controlling for a straight line. It's controlling just for optical velocity, vertical optical velocity and lateral. And this is the equivalent of the observations that they made. This is the plot of the optical position of the ball for the model, and it produces not only straight lines, but the lines have a little bit of curvature in them. So, so I told these guys, I got in touch with them, told them, and I actually had lunch with one of them and told them, if you really want to test your thing, your model, 10 minutes? Oh, okay. You got to put in disturbances. So they put in disturbances by having strapping the video to a dog when as it was catching a frisbee, and this is what you get when a dog is catching an irregular thing, and this is what my model does. It doesn't produce straight lines anymore. Yet, because people are committed to their beliefs about the way things are, they thought, oh, well, what's happening here is actually they're trying to move it in two straight lines. Wow. That's their theory. Segmented linear things. So, but, so these are the conclusions. You can read that. The next thing I'll talk about is tangential velocity profiles. Unfortunately, all I have is the profiles, but these were reported by Atkinson and Halbeck, and what they did is they measured the velocity when people moved their hands vertically over various distances at various speeds, and then they did this thing. They plotted the velocity of each movement over time, and then they normalized each movement regardless of its length or speed, and they came out with the fact that all the movements have the same velocity profile. It starts off slow and moves up just like that. So this is called an invariant velocity. And again, this is a mathematical invariance. It's exciting. It looks like, hey, this says something about how people move. And what happened was Powers showed that this kind of profile is produced by a control model, the little man. If you're familiar with the little man model, the little man just controlling his finger position like the people did, moving his finger up and down, produces invariant velocity profiles as a side effect of control. So again, we see this attractive, seductive mathematical regularity. And this is, I'm just quoting Bill because I don't have his original data, which I'll try to get, but that's that. So now I'll let Richard take it. There's another one.
Okay, so this next experiment is the term called paradox movement. You can get people to do regular movements like scribbles and ellipses over and over again. You find that the tighter the curve, the slower they move. And the straighter the curve, the faster they move. And so you have this power law, speed is proportional to some power of the curvature, and a certain value that tends to come up. So this is an example of someone doing an ellipse, and you get this power law of 1/3. But then you, as usual, you do a PCT experiment and add a hidden disturbance to the relationship between the mouse and the actual cursor on the screen. So you get people to trace the same lips, you get the same sort of power law. But if then you look at their actual movements of the mouse, which gets added to the disturbance, you get something completely different. So people studying this power law, this supposed power law, they think, oh, this must be encoded in the cerebellum somewhere. This is a fundamental part of how people move, but it just takes an experiment like this to dissociate the two things. You have the visual track, which does more or less satisfy the power law, but the actual movements are nothing like that. There's other problems with the power law. Any smooth oscillation tends to produce the power law. Imagine a pendulum oscillating in an ellipse. Mathematically, that's going to produce an exact power law between the logarithm of velocity and logarithm of curvature. Even if I generate things like this, swirly movements, you still get this approximate power law. It's really difficult to not get a power law, in fact. So, a couple of papers there. It seemed to be a byproduct of just favouring smooth trajectories, unlikely to serve as a primary movement generating principle. And even if you just generate trajectories from pure noise, you get a power law like that. So, yes, that's just repeating the same thing we're pounding away at in all of these examples. Let's skip over all that text. Okay. Another thing people have studied is you film an animal from the side walking and make some turntables, you get the whole walk loop over and over again. Measure three angles, the whatever it is, the foot, the ankle, the knee and the hip joint. You plot those angles over time, and then you put them in this abstract three-dimensional space. You tend to find that the trajectory, which could take any shape in principle in three-dimensional space, it tends to be very flat. And that's been observed in lots of creatures of all sizes. Little bird there and an elephant. So again, there's this assumption that the system is trying to produce this behaviour. But there are two examples where it just emerges from the basic mechanism. Now, this movie does not actually, it's put it out, it's on the, how do I get the,
I think these days,
there. Okay. There's an animation I made a long time ago. 6 joints are being animated in each arm, 6 degrees of freedom, like this movement, and so on.
Can loop it if you want.
But they're all doing simple harmonic motion. Each degree of freedom just oscillating back and forth. So 6 degrees of freedom in each arm, 12-dimensional configuration space. You still get a flat ellipse. And there's no control process or anything going on there at all. Another movie that I have to go back here to play. So this is a robot simulation that I made quite a long time ago.
Double click it.
Double click.
You need to go back to the video at the bottom. Yeah.
There it is. Is there an auto loop? Yeah, six legs, 3 degrees of freedom in each leg, so the elbow, what do we call that, the knee joint can open, shoulder goes up and down, or...
Go to it next.
And this has a PCT hierarchy inside it. It's trying to keep its body above the centre of the footprint. And every now and then it lifts the legs and puts them forward, so now it's behind the footprint, so it swings itself forward again. That's the basic mechanism. And if you so I go back to slideshow. Play, front slide. I'll skip over the actual architecture.
Don't worry, you've still got time.
Okay, but I'll skip over the actual architecture anyway. So, Is it later in it? Yes. So here's, you can see, this is the body seen from above. The head of the object at the front. So I captured those 3 joint angles over one walk cycle. And so I look at the middle left leg here. These 2 plots show the same data, just from 2 different angles. And they're just plotted with 3 joint angles, elbow, shoulder up and down, shoulder back and forward. This is from a...
That's it.
Yeah, that's close.
Okay. So that's seen from the side, so you can see how flat that trajectory is. And this is seen at 90 degrees, that's you're seeing face on. And it's the same for all the others. This rear leg from the side, very flat, and face on. The slightly curved half there, that's the stance face, and it's driving the body forwards. And then one of those is when it lifts the leg up and forwards, and then the third one puts it back down to the ground. And all that is done by control processes. And these numbers, these gauge planarity members, these are a measure of how clever it is. 0 means completely flat. And this particular measure, completely space filling would be 1/3. You see these are all very, very small values of planarity. These directions really are very flat. But of course there is nothing in the robot that is trying to do that. There's no outcome of this. That is the architecture. It's trying to control 6 degrees of freedom of the body. Position relative to the footprint and orientation. There's reference values, it senses what the actual values are. The error is fed by this matrix to all the 18 controllers for the 18 leg joints. And what it's doing there is setting reference values. If it's too low, for example, it wants to swing the shoulders downwards and also the elbows. And then this matrix is not tuned in any way. I just thought which direction does it need to swing its legs in each joint to achieve the reference. And then these joint angle velocity references, they go to a controller for joint angle velocity, which outputs torques, and I assume the actuators just provide torques directly. And then the environment, I simulate physics of it, and that's what is good. And that's for legs on the ground. For legs that are in the air, there's a reference to the foot position relative to the body. Notice where the foot is, and a reference value. The error is fed to all 3 joint angle velocity. And for this purpose, I assume that the actuators apply velocity direction to the joints. Just keep it simple. So that's all the control stuff that's happening. And of course, there's nothing in there about keeping these abstract trajectories in this 3-dimensional space. There's nothing in there about making that clever. So you can get this gauge planarity. It seems to be a real thing that people observe in lots of angles, but you can get it from a simple system that isn't trying to produce it. It doesn't sense it, it doesn't encode it, it's not controlling for that. So in general, when you see an observed regularity, that doesn't imply that anything is really trying to produce it. It can be just a side effect of the mechanism. And to discover how it really works, you need to look for that mechanism, test for controlled variables, and see how it responds to disturbances. Conclusion, right? So the relevance to perceptual control. When you're trying to understand a regularity, you first need to think, is control involved in this at all? It might not be. But if there is a control phenomenon there, then you have to, you can't just look at correlations between things. You have to perhaps make some guess about what is being controlled and then apply disturbances. And then see how it responds to those. If you push on something and it doesn't move, and it seems like it would, that tells you it's probably under control, or something closely related to it is under control. So that's just the test of a control variable. And so that's the first step towards mathematical understanding of that behaviour. I think that's the last slide.